Okay, we are going to start the effective planning presentation somewhat in the middle at prioritizing instruction with Go Math is where we're going to start. I'm going to go back and forth between this and being live. At this point, we have already talked about, so we've already been together and talked about what makes an effective plan and what does an effective plan have to have and what does it need to involve and how to make that lesson rigorous by making it student-centered and using quality questions. So we've already talked about that. So now, before we actually look at a particular lesson, we're going to talk about prioritizing instruction with Go Math. So how we're going to start that out is I'm going to start by just asking you, how do you feel when you start a new program? More specifically, obviously, how do you feel about starting Go Math? It's a big program with a lot of different resources. So I just want you to think about that and turn and talk to your neighbor next to you or someone at your table after you've had a chance to think about it, and talk to them about how they feel about starting a new program. Particularly, obviously, we're talking about Go Math. So how do you feel about starting this new program? And go ahead and do that, and then we'll come back together. Okay. Thank you for sharing with each other. Does anyone want to share what you talked about, how you're feeling about starting a new program, even though you did start this probably a few months ago, but there's a lot involved in it? Okay, some of you are saying definitely overwhelmed, really not sure what resources to use or how to use them all. Okay, I'm hearing pacing as a little bit of a trying to get the pacing down and knowing what to use. Okay, good, great, all perfectly normal things, especially with a program as robust as Go Math. There are so many different resources that you can use, and we do that because Go Math is designed to be able to be delivered completely digital or completely print. And so what we do is provide schools with everything. So you essentially have two ways to completely deliver a program, which means, yes, lots of resources. So you have the advantage of being able to pick and choose which of these resources you want to use, which ones work best for your classroom because of your technology needs, so which ones are you going to pull from the digital pieces because of the technology that you have available in your room and to your kiddos, and what things are you going to use from the print concepts. And then within that, there's still so many different resources that you have to treat it like a buffet. You look at everything that's spread out in front of you and what you have to use, and you need to pick what works in presenting the lesson. What are these things are going to achieve results for your student? We want, at the end of the day, what we're working towards with planning a lesson is student achievement and, teaching them. So that's what I need you to keep in mind, and to not be overwhelmed. Don't feel like you have to use all of them. We're going to talk about how to prioritize a lesson when we're going to drill down to the lesson level here in a little bit. But right now we're going to start with at the unit level. Before you do anything with a particular lesson, looking at what you're going to learn in a complete chapter and what are some things that can help you prioritize and plan effectively with that. So a few things that we're going to talk about that I want you to look at when preparing the unit are there are some resources that are in the beginning of your chapter book. So if you're using your print concepts to follow along with me today, I'm sorry, not print concepts, your print teacher edition to follow along with me today, go ahead and just grab one. You may have only brought one today. And we're going to be looking at the front information of that. There are a few sections before the unit even begins that we're going to be looking at. We're going to look at the learning progression for the chapter, the teaching for death part, which tells you what kind of math background you really need to know deeply before going in and guiding your students in their learning. And then we're also going to look at what assessments are going to help guide my instruction. So the first thing that we're going to talk about today is the learning progressions. And if you can see right here, I'm going to actually take you live to where you can find that on your teacher dashboard. So I'm going to go over to Think Central. And I've got grade 2 pulled up, but really it doesn't matter what grade level we're looking at. It's all pretty much the same. These pre-preparation things are all the same for the grade levels. So I'm going to go to chapter 4. I'm just going to pick a random grade 2, chapter 4, which is 2-digit addition. And I'm going to look in the planning section. And since I'm looking for learning progressions, that's the one I'm going to click on to go to. And this is going to look just like the slide I just showed you. Maybe not just like, but it looks very similar to the slide that I just had up, but with a little bit more information. So for this particular chapter, Learning Progressions and Content Standards, it's Operations in Algebraic Thinking and Number and Operations in Base 10. So it's going to tell me across the grade level. So we're currently in grade level 2 right now. So this year, these are the standards that you're going to be addressing. These are the standards that were addressed with them last year. Now, this is particularly important since this is your first year of teaching with this program, because just because this is here doesn't mean that they may have learned exactly that last year because you were working with a different program or no program at all. I'm sure that with your teaching expertise, but yes, you did teach this, but it may not align perfectly with the area that you're teaching with this program. And then you want to also pay attention to after. So next year in 3rd grade, for this particular domain and cluster, what are they going to need to know? And it goes into a little bit more detail up here by telling us before grade 2, children represented and solved addition and subtraction problems within 20. They were then able to use place value understanding and properties to add and subtract within 100. By using different addition and subtraction strategies, children were able to solve addition and subtraction word problems. So this is before grade 2. So now in grade 2, with these domains and clusters, children increase their proficiency with addition and subtraction. In this chapter, children use their understanding of place value to become more fluent with addition to find sums of 2, 3, and 4 2-digit numbers. So they're expanding on this knowledge of place value, and they're needing to know, now they're hundreds, and they're instead of just ones and tens, they're also going to need to know hundreds, perhaps thousands, depending on where you go with this, and then they're going to have to use addition strategies for that. And then it's going to tell us next year they're going to use this knowledge to solve multiplication and division problems. So you know what you have to prepare them to do for next year. So connect to the major work. The major work in grade 2 includes using place value and properties of operations to add and subtract. The children are going to break apart ones to add, use compensation, and break apart add-ins as tens and ones in lesson 4:1 through 4:3. And then in 4:4 through 4:8, they model with regrouping and learning how to record addition using the standard algorithm. In lesson 4:9, children solve 2-digit addition problems using the bar model diagram. Then they apply these strategies and skills in lessons 4:10 to 4:12 by writing equations using a symbol for the unknown atom or sum and finding sums for 2, 3, and 4. So in this lesson, we know they're going to visit multiple ways to solve these 2-digit addition problems. And then they're going to have to choose those strategies. They're going to have to use the strategy that the lesson points out. Okay, use your the standard algorithm, use model bar diagram, use your regrouping strategy. And that way they are armed with all of these different strategies, because the idea is to understand why they're doing this and how they can do it. And then when they are giving a real world problem, they can pick the strategy that works best for them and apply it. So that's really important for you to understand, is what they're learning across these grade levels and what they're going to learn that you're teaching them. So that's a really important thing to review before planning instruction at the lesson level. Any questions about this before we move on to the next piece? Great. So the next section we're going to look at is the teaching for depth. And that's basically saying what math background do I need to teach this lesson? And yes, you probably know all there is to know you have been teaching second grade for 20 years and you really know about this addition and subtraction 2 to 3 digit. That's not the idea. The idea behind it is because of the way new math, I suppose is what everyone is calling it. When they've added these math process standards in, they're asking students to solve math at a conceptual level. They want them to be able to explain why they're doing it and not just what the answer is. And that's not the way we learned when we were in elementary school. And it's also not the way we're used to teaching it. So sometimes when you have to teach in a little bit different format and we're wanting our students to gain that conceptual understanding, we're pushing for rigorous learning development, then sometimes it's good for us to make sure we understand what that learning development is and what it means to teach for depth. What are the ideas behind that? So that's what the idea for this section, teaching for depth section is, because it'll also give you some resources to use. So it just goes into modeling with a 2-digit number and how to model. It gives you some ideas on what children may struggle with and how you can help them with that, what the research says about this particular concept, how to develop procedural fluency with multi-digit arithmetic, and then it's really hard without a core understanding of place value, so how important it is to make sure your kiddos have that place value understanding. And then it goes into the specific math process and practice standards that this particular lesson will address. Their reasoning abstractively and quantitatively. And this is where that tells you, okay, that's the math process standard. Do you remember when we talked about questions and how to question to develop rigor? Well, that section that has those questions that you can use for that particular math process standard to get at that, to reason abstractively and quantitatively, you can use those questions and have that in front of you as a reference to ask your students to really get them to use that math process and practice standard and to understand conceptually what they're learning. So another resource that they provided right here is there's a professional development video that you can watch, and you can find all of the professional development videos will be out here on your Think Central dashboard. Let's go ahead and close this one out and this one out. So your professional development is going to be the teal. Blue. I'm sorry. Your professional development is going to be the blue. Under this mathematical practices PD videos is where you'll find those professional development videos. I am also going to show you where to find that teaching for depth in your teacher edition. So let's go back to that chapter 4, planning, and then teaching for depth. And that's where you'll find that on your e-teacher book, but also you can reference it in your print teacher book. It'll just be in the beginning before you start the unit. So that's where you'll find that exact same thing we just looked at on my slide. However, maybe just this is a different lesson, so the content is a little bit different. I was reading from the lesson that was being used as an example. So this is for this particular chapter. Okay? So I'm going to close that out. And then we're going to go and look at the third part of prioritizing your instruction at the unit level. And that is looking at your chapter assessments. Okay, so we know that there's a lot of different assessments that can be used for students, but we're looking at the chapter level. So the whole unit. Remember, we're not drilling down to the lesson quite yet. So there's a couple of chapter assessments that I want to talk about that would be important for you to look at in prioritizing your instruction. And the first one is going to be the chapter test. At the end of the chapter, there is a test that you can give. Remember, you can give it by paper or you can use the personal math trainer to give it. And by looking at this particular one, and this is for a different grade level or different lesson within second grade, but by looking at it, it's going to tell me what exactly are my students being held accountable for at the end of this chapter. So I know, especially if I'm getting low on time and I choose not to address certain things or not to work together through a particular problem, that at least I know I'm covering what they're going to be held accountable for. So I think it's valuable, and this is a recommendation, and obviously time doesn't always permit this, but I would recommend going through that chapter assessment yourself and taking it so that you understand what it is that you want your students to be held accountable for. And that'll kind of be in the back of your mind as you plan that instruction, as you pick out the pieces and you go through that buffet and you use the resources that you want with your students. You know what they're going to be held accountable for. So those chapter assessments can be found, they're in the students have one in their book. That can be used as a pre-test or a practice test or study guide. And then you can also get another version in your chapter resources book under tests. And then this is chapter 4, so you will find your test here under chapter 4 tests. And some of them are pretty long, so make sure you've got enough time built in, or you can do it in 1 or 2 different pieces of time. But look at these story problems. See how they're really wanting students to understand the strategies and the conceptually how to apply their strategies to real world problems. Because this is a lot of word problems. This isn't just how do you solve 30 plus 67. This is saying explain how you can solve this problem using mental math. That's a strategy. They have to actually say what they did. And then here they're talking about regrouping. Explain. You will notice that theme throughout Go Math. Explain, explain, explain. So using those math talk pieces, really getting your kids talking and working collaboratively to practice explaining how they did the math is going to be key here. But you know by looking at this assessment that your students are going to have to explain conceptually how they solve these problems. So here they're giving these problems, but then describe how you solve these problems. They're using their words. So I think that's valuable information to know. I mean, to really drill down and guide your students' learning. Any questions about this particular chapter test? We do know that you could grab it from your teacher resources book, but that you can also assign chapter tests through the personal math trainer. And I know we've kind of talked about this, but if we're at chapter 4 and you go down to the end here, it's going to show you'll have a couple pre-tests and a couple post-tests. And the reason you have all these options is so that you can give a pre and a post. You can do one for practice or a study guide and then give one for the actual tests. And so you have lots of different options on when and what to use both in print and digitally. Okay, so we're going to, one other resource, assessment resource that I think is valuable that you'll definitely want to make the time to give your students is the show what you know at the beginning of the chapter. So let's go find that for chapter 4 in planning, show what you know. And that is at the very beginning of the chapter before you start any of the lessons. It is assessing their prior knowledge. What prerequisite skills do they know, have they learned coming into this lesson? Do they know what they need to know? Do they know basic, one-digit addition? Can they do that simple one-digit addition before moving into 2- and 3-digit addition? Do they understand place value? So you're testing that, because if they don't have that basic foundational knowledge, they're not going to be able to grasp what you're going to teach them in this lesson. So the great thing about Go Math is it gives you the tools to administer this at the beginning. You can give it to them. They have it right there in their student books. Or if they do have the capability to go digital, then you can go through your personal math trainer. And this assessment is also available here in your course-based assignments. If you go down to chapter 4, here's your show what you know. Now it has 2 different versions here, homework version and tests and quizzes. And I know we've talked about this before as well in one of your other trainings, but just kind of to remind you, if it's in homework version, it means that they have the built-in scaffolding available to them. They will be able to check their answers. They will be able to view an example. those types of things. If you are giving it to them in test and quizzes modes, they lose that capability. You're straight testing their knowledge without giving them any kind of help or reminders or the ability to check their answers. So you choose what works best for you and your students and what you think that they need. Some of your kiddos might need that little reminder, oh, that's how you do it. They might know how to do it, they just need a little activation. And then you may decide, I want to know what my kiddos know, and I'm not giving them any help. This is a cold, do you know it or do you not? Because what you can do from this information after you give them, go back to the show what you know. After you give them that, based on how they do, it's going to give you this intervention chart at the beginning. So before you start the unit, you can pump up their knowledge, intervene, and give them a review of those prerequisite skills. And some of them may have just needed a reminder, a quick reminder, an intervention activity. They're right here in the strategic intervention. You do a small group or individual intervention with them, and they're ready to go. You're going to also have those kiddos that maybe are a grade level or more behind, and they're going to need an intensive intervention. And that's probably not going to be the only intervention they need. That's not enough to get them where they need to be, but they're getting exposure to it. And the more exposure and relearning that they get, then that's going to move them closer and closer to the grade level content that you're teaching them. Okay, so here it gives you what you would use to intervene with these students before you start the lesson. So any questions about the unit level resources that you can use to prioritize your instruction with GoMath? Any questions there? Great.